What leads to a full-blown cybersecurity breach? Shiva P is a senior security researcher at Microsoft Dart, and in this episode, he's going to share some incident response war stories. He's going to share some common pitfalls and also career advice to keep you from ever having to deal with the worst case scenario. So let's get into it. So you've dealt with some of the worst case scenarios a customer might face, right? That terrible day at the office where they come in and there's been an incident. What are the recurring themes that you keep spotting? What are the things that folks are doing wrong? And what's your kind of general advice to improve stuff like that?
I think one of the things that we constantly see is node sharing model, or the worst thing I would generally say is MFA. Like absence of MFA, or that there is no proper phishing resistant MFA. And like in fact, I just had like one of the a few weeks back there was a case where we handled where there was actually an absence of MFA, but this whole thing kicked off a little bit different. Every single case is more of a worst case scenario. It gets really hard.
So you mentioned the MFA, common recurring problem, right? Is this are the customers you're working with just not doing MFA of any type, or are they doing some MFA but just not strong enough MFA? What does that look like?
I think it sort of differs from organizations to organizations. The last few engagements that I've been on, especially the last one, there was absence of like completely no MFA. And that was basically a custom application which they were hosting on one of these servers where there was like a missing MFA, which led to a lot of the organizational compromise. But there are where we have seen that MFA being rolled out, but just that it's being done like poorly. For example, MFA with just an SMS, or there's also times when people just have to authenticate an MFA by pressing pound and that's it. So these are the poor versions of MFA. Even though implemented, it's not going to usually help a lot.
Right, that's cool. That's interesting because I mean, you see a lot in you see a lot of hype now around passkeys for MFA, right, and things like that. And it's like there's so many customers out there that are just struggling to do MFA in the first place. So how do we get them from 0 to 100 really, really fast is something that you kind of have to contend with. And it sounds like the attack that you just mentioned. So is this like a public facing app? No MFA to get in. They breach that application, and from there they were able to pivot into other resources and well, ultimately compromise.
Exactly what happened. So I'll just give you a little bit of that specific story. So it was a remote an application which was similar to how any desk or a team viewer would work. And the funny part is this is a custom application which is hosted on a server which is exposed publicly. And when let's say someone randomly, like let's say if you are entering the right username and password, that specific user would be provided different servers that they are having access to. And in this case, what we basically saw was the actor did a traversal and found a configuration file, and it's a bad implementation. The configuration file had hashes of all the users who usually uses the specific application, right? And I think like around 3 days later, we saw this actor logging in using one of these usernames and passwords. And as soon as they logged in, they basically get access to 3 to 4 servers, whatever that specific user has access to. And so they basically log in and click on one of these different, they basically log into multiple different servers. And this tool either gives you sort of a command line pop-up where you can actually enter commands, or it can also give you sort of an RDP version of, a GUI version of the machine, right? And if the actor opts to use the command line, what happens is the service for that specific tool, which is running on these different servers, right? It unfortunately was running on a high value or a highly privileged account. And so which means the command line that is going to come up with a highly privileged account. And it was pretty straightforward, really easy for the actor. All that they did was they came in, they logged in, they found that it provides a command line. They just popped it open. They noticed that it is running a highly privileged command line. It was coming with a highly privileged account. So all that they did was create a local account, and as soon as they created a local account, they log into that local account and they start bringing in their own tools. And before even they did that, offload the EDR which was already on those servers, and a lot of reconnaissance after that using like just NetScan or advanced IP scanner. And they brought in a Hydra and a Mimikatz as well. They first ran the Hydra against different local administrators inside the network after the reconnaissance and discovery. And as soon as like around 2000-ish attempt. So we were counting, basically seeing like, okay, 2000 failures. And right after the 2000-ish, we saw that this specific local account started logging in. And as soon as they figured out the password, they started to use the same password across multiple different servers. And that's when we realized that the local administrator was using the same password for all the different servers. And it sort of enabled them to move laterally to different places. The only good thing here is, as soon as this was figured out, we figured that it all came from that specific application, which is the remote access tool. And we killed that server. As soon as that happened, the actor completely lost access to the environment. I mean, of course, we were looking for the persistence if that was there, but I think either the actor was really confident that they would not be caught, or that they wanted to do it like a quick win, like quick in and quick out, and that's it, or that they were not thinking about the persistence, but they basically lost complete access and it sort of foiled in between. But yeah, I think there was a lot of lessons learned, especially in this one engagement.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, tons to unpack there, because it sounds like they were doing a lot of stuff wrong, right? And if only one of those things was
Yep.
kind of fixed, that might have,
Yep.
there's a list of like 5 things I'm thinking off the top of my head there. And if one
True.
of them might have been in place, you could have potentially stopped the whole thing. Right,
Exactly.
that's cool.
The first thing probably is like, if you had like even the basic MFA, I think the first, after, as soon as the initial entry, that would have been like, not even possible. If that server was properly patched, that specific application, if it was properly patched, that would have prevented this actor even exploiting the traversal in the first place. And the next part of that is this specific application, it is running on a high privilege, right? I mean, if they had not let it run on a high privilege and really understood why that is required to even run it, that would have prevented this user or this threat actor from creating a local account. If they had not used the same password and used the labs or some other similar version of it, they could have prevented this actor from moving laterally. And all of this, like if done like well, would have given enough time for the security team themselves to respond to this incident, and they wouldn't have been like, it wouldn't have come this far, and probably in like the first or second attempt, and everything else would have stopped.
Right. That's interesting, because it's like, well, I mean, the things you just listed off, it's MFA, it's patching, it's
Yep.
least privilege,
Yep.
it's unique credentials. These aren't particularly new stories that we should be telling the world, right? These have been kind of cybersecurity principles for an awful long time, I guess. And
Yep, definitely.
what interested me there, that you just mentioned, was if they'd at least had one of those in place, that would have bought some time where the security team could have responded. And so, to be clear, the kind of customers you're working with, quite often they will have security teams. So it's not a case of they don't have people monitoring this kind of stuff. It's just that there's a problem with the posture in the first place. Is that like a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment. It's like, yes, like you said, the teams that we work with, or the companies that we work with, usually would have like some sort of a security team in place, some sort of security that is already running. But just that, because of a bad posture or because of like a multitude of different issues, they would usually have like some sort of a lapse, due to which there's going to be a threat actor who kind of figures that out, and everything else starts to cascading into a major and at the very end.
Gotcha. And so,
the complimentary Threatscape Entra advisory service is here to help, and you will get time at no cost with an Entra ID expert in our team, covering advice and recommendations on what matters the most to you in the world of identity security. So reach out to us about the Entra ID advisory service, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
one of the other things I want to pick up about that kind of war story you mentioned was that the adversary, I think you mentioned they start decommissioning the EDR that was in place. Is that right? But
Yep,
that's an interesting one. That's like your typical defense evasion type stuff, right? But a lot of customers we work with, you kind of think, hey, I got the EDR deployed, I'm safe. It just takes care of everything for me. What's your experience been when you're working on incident response of the adversaries and their ability to either bypass EDR products or just pull them out altogether?
I think it all depends on what sort of privilege they have on all of these machines, right? They get access to. Like, for example, in the case that I was working on, they basically had the local administrator themselves. So all that they needed to do was change a few keys in the registry, and basically kill off the entire EDR, whichever EDR was in place. I mean, no matter what the sort of EDR you have, you can still kill it in one way or another. When you do that sort of a thing, yeah, I mean, in the end, the actor starts bringing in few other tools to basically do every other part of the chain. And yeah, this is something that we usually see. I mean, just having an EDR is not going to be enough. But that doesn't mean that, okay, you know what, I'm not going to have an EDR. That is going to be like the worst thing to do. It's always better to have an EDR, but it doesn't mean like it's going to be a foolproof system. It's just because you have an EDR doesn't mean that you're protected. You still have to do a lot of different security. You have to take security seriously, do a lot of different security things before you can, call yourself secured.
Yeah. No, it's a good, don't take away the wrong lesson here.
Yep, that's
Don't
right.
try and pull out your EDR, I guess. But yeah, I mean, look, it's kind of, you mentioned how, for example, it had that local admin account that was highly privileged. At the end of the day, on a platform like Windows, if you've got local admin, you own the device, right? That's kind of the bottom line. There's things in place. I know, for example, Defender for Endpoint has like tamper protection, which limits what admins can do, but it's still, that is the security boundary, right? Is if you get that admin, you're in theory complete control of that device.
Yep, sort of, yes.
And so on a similar vein, if we take that logic and we apply it to like a domain, you mentioned tiering. Now, tiering something that, I mean, the number of customers, organizations that use AD that have proper tiering in place, it's probably less than 1%. Right? It's not well adopted framework, unfortunately. Why should customers care about that, right? What's the fundamental defense that tiering in Active Directory would give them?
So basically, yeah, I think it's more of, making the life really hard for the threat actor. Like, for example, if you take Octo Tempest themselves, they're sort of like, they don't like really prolong their presence in an environment. They want to get it like quickly done and move to the next part of like whatever they're doing. So having a tiering model, having all these different blocks or different security controls would make their lives a lot more harder. I mean, they have to figure out every other way to get to like probably the DC themselves or probably to get to one of what they really want, like whatever the intentions are. For them to get there, there's going to be multiple hoops before getting there, right? And they're going to jump around trying to figure out, they're going to fail and they're going to try something else and that's going to fail, and then they're going to try some other way of getting in. And by the time they do that, they'll be like at a point demotivated enough that, okay, you know what, this is not going to be worth it. Let me go to another organization and do whatever I want to do, because this is getting like really messy. And also it gives the enough time for, like, I'm pretty sure most of the organizations at this moment at least would be at least in a point where they know security is something important, right? And this sort of thing would give them give different security team enough time to handle incidents, try to figure out what's really happening, analyze, okay, you know what, all of this is happening and this is not supposed to be happening, and this would give them enough time to figure that out and take the right actions, which would actually stop the attacker even before they can get to the impact stage, right? But if it was like a flat network and all that you have to do is log in and then touch the DC and dump like ntds.det or all of these credentials, and you have the entire control over your entire domain, yeah, that's like, it's going to be like a few steps and that's it, right? And that would not give even, in fact, like an internal security team enough time to even respond, because that would happen like in just hours, and they would already have like multiple different alerts, like some random incident handler or an incident analyst who's looking into, and by the time he gets to that incident, it's going to take a while, right? And that is what we basically mean when I say tiering. It's more of, it's not like, again, going to be one-stop shop and you got tiering and you're like completely safe. That's not what I'm trying to say, but rather it's more of different blocks. All of these together is going to really protect your organization.
Sure. So like, I mean, one of the themes that just keeps booming out of you is that it's all about increasing the duration at which it takes the attacker to achieve their objectives. That number one, you're producing tons and tons of noise to let the defensive teams know about it. But number two, and this is one of the interesting ones, you're just making, I think what you mentioned was you're making their life basically a nightmare, so that they get tired, they get demotivated, and they're like, you know what, these guys are too tough. Let's find some poor sucker that's a little bit easier to compromise.
Exactly.
So like I've had discussions like that with customers where I kind of say, hey, raise the adversary cost, make their life a nightmare until they just give up and move on. Coming from you, it sounds like you're saying the same thing, which is quite validating. So that is a legitimate defensive strategy for customers, I guess.
Yep, it is. It definitely is. I mean, because most of the actors are financially motivated. Forget about all the NSNs, but let's just think about usual attackers or usual actors who are financially motivated. I mean, if they're basically financially motivated, and if you're going to take up a humongous amount of time, probably a month, or making it like 1.5 months, where they have to dwell in your environment, try to figuring out the entire thing before they can get to the impact. And even after they do that, if it is still extremely hard to get to do what they want to really do, I mean, it is not going to be worth it on a longer run, right? They're going to jump out and figure another organization which is like easier to do all of this and get their money and then and leave that, because it's in the end it's all money, or it's basically financial motivation. So
Yeah, gotcha. So would it be fair then to kind of break down the potential adversaries in kind of two fields then, or maybe more, but the two ones that it sounds like to me it maybe is then are your financially motivated actors, your kind of stereotypical ransomware gang, right, coming out of North Korea or Russia or wherever that might be. They want to get in there, smash, grab, take it, get out nice and fast. And then you've got your nation state threats, or you're more advanced and persistent, and they're more interested in the long run, the slow burn, and they can just throw infinite resource at it. But I guess what the vast majority of organizations need to be concerned about is that first type, right? It's the ones that are just going to come in and hit you. Is that kind of what you're seeing in the field?
exactly, that is exactly what we see in the field. Nation states are of course going to be differently motivated, with of course a lot of resources in their hands, a lot of things that they have in their arsenal. But that's not going to be the case for a financially motivated actor, because in the end they themselves do not have, like, I wouldn't say enough. They would not want to burn things that they already have, and especially when you're using it in an environment, and when they get, when any other security team gets a wind of it, that's going to end up on VirusTotal. And it's going to be ending up creating a signature. I mean, people are going to create signatures for it, and it's going to be widely talked about. So that's going to be a loss for this team. So that is like one of the things that usually financially motivated actors would do. They would try to get in, grab things, and then get out, and that's it. They don't really care about it. I mean, we have seen, like, even on the fields as well, there's a lot of times where we have seen where actors directly download right out of GitHub tools, like right out of GitHub, and right away install it and run these tools, right? Like an advanced IP scanner or a net scan, or directly downloading ads from GitHub. It's as simple as that, and that's what we have seen on the fields, and that's what they basically do.
See, that's really interesting to hear, because if you live in the kind of the social media newsfeed bubble, right, you see all these things coming up on LinkedIn, and it'll say, hey, attackers are more sophisticated than ever, and blah, 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 blah. But that's probably true for a lot of attackers. But for an awful lot of attackers, it's also true that they don't care about the sophistication from the sounds of things, right? I mean, I don't know, if you compromise a server, you RDP onto it, and you're just opening Chrome, and you're downloading Mimikat straight off of GitHub, that doesn't scream to me like the most sophisticated type of attack in the world, right? So, I mean, in terms of the ones that are sophisticated, what are they doing differently from your more crude attackers, right? Like, what's the distinguishing feature between the ones that, hey, these guys are actually going to be far harder to detect than the ones that just come in, almost brute force their way into compromising you?
Yeah, okay. Let's take an example of a credential access, right? Just to differentiate between these different actors who are like really sophisticated and actors who are like not that sophisticated. Actors who are not sophisticated, like just as we spoke, they just randomly download a Mimikatz from a GitHub and then run it and get the passwords, and they're good. It just takes them a minute or two and they get to what they want to do, right? But let's say a little bit of sophisticated actors. Of course, this is going to be an organization which has like a really good security control in place, which would make it harder for downloading ads and executing it on a machine. And even if it's going to execute, let's assume that this machine does not have like any of the cache credentials, right? It's set to 0, so which means you're not going to really drop anything, and there's going to be a lot of other protections in place which stops this attacker from getting all these credentials, right? But in the end, the intent is to get credentials, and because they want to move probably to the next phase of the attack, right? And I mean, at this point, it's going to like diverge into two. Usually, attackers who are like not that sophisticated would stop here, move on to the next company, because it's not going to be worth it. But there's going to be actors out there who are like really sophisticated. For example, there might be an actor who is capable of, I mean, we've seen it as well on the fields where they basically register a network provider, and you know how Windows works, right? When you log on, it passes this credential to different services, and one of that services is going to be a network provider. And if that actor basically puts a random DLL in one of these system 32 places and has this network provider registered, and let's assume that takes this credential and stores it in one of these random text file in a path that it already states, that's a way of getting a password. And this is the sort of sophistication between a normal simple actor who is like, downloading mimikatz and executing it, to a sophisticated actor who is not able to do all of this using a mimikatz. So what they do is do something of the sort where the network provider use a malicious DLL and then get a clear text password when some user logs in.
Gotcha. So well, like, I guess kind of one of the takeaways from that is if I'm a more sophisticated adversary, I'm not necessarily just using tools that are floating out there in the public internet, right? I'm hesitant to use the term because it's a little bit of a buzz term and all that, but I'm more inclined to use the kind of native Windows capabilities against itself rather than going out there and just grabbing malware because, hey, EDR Navy is going to light up like a Christmas tree with that.
Yep, exactly.
So I guess one of that kind of maybe draws me on to one of the other questions was in terms of the takeaway advice for blue teamers and things like that. Some of the stuff we mentioned was pretty fundamental. It's MFA, it's unique credentials and least privilege and all that kind of good stuff. But if I'm against an adversary who feels like they've got unlimited resources, right? Let's say it's a nation state kind of level attack. For whatever reason, they're coming after my poor little organization and maybe I get some valuable IP or something like that. At what stage should I be more worried about those adversaries than, dare I say, your more financially motivated ones, right? And if I am at that level of risk, what are the things I need to do differently, right? Or is it simply a case of everybody should kind of be doing the same things in cybersecurity? Or do I reach a certain level where it's like, actually, no, you need to do way more above and beyond than your typical organization?
I think you should probably, let's assume that you're starting off at a scratch and you do not have like much of a security controls in place. I think that is where you have to start off with. Initially start off with like, the low hanging fruits. Make sure to do the right things the right way. Like for example, the basic stuff, have an MFA, have a just in time, make sure to have an EDR in the first place. Like when we were talking about the previous case where there was like a server which was capable of, exposed to internet, make sure that do the basic stuff at least. Like make sure that these servers do not have external access unless and until only for the ones which require like some sort of a business need. Do not like randomly expose servers to the internet. All of these needs to be done. When we are talking about nation states, right, they are going to get in one way or another. That doesn't mean that we have to stop. Like every single module of, let's say, every single block of control that you're going to do, every single increment over your security, every single small cascading control that you're going to put is going to make it a lot harder for such nation securities. And at the very end, like it's going to, for let's say for an example, a nation state is going to take probably going to sit like around 3 to 6 months or 1 year, in any of these organizations, right? It might take a lot more time for them to really get to where they want to get to. And that is what we have to aim at, to make it extremely hard. Even if it's going to be a nation state, make their lives really harder by doing all the basic first and then making sure that, you keep incrementing, doing way better than what you were already doing. And that will make their lives a lot harder. And that'll make, the blast radius, that'll sort of reduce the blast radius to really, a small one. And that is what I think we should aim for and we should strive for.
A good point, that kind of minimizing that overall attack surface, right? So that you're nice and lean. And like Microsoft Security Exposure Management does some really cool stuff there, right? We'll say, hey, you've got across all your tenant, hey, here's all the publicly exposed RDP session and here's an attack path and all that kind of stuff, right? And I'd be interested in your thoughts here, but I kind of see that as cybersecurity matures over time, I see that continual attack path management, exposure reduction. To me, that's kind of where customers need to be for real maturity, right? And as far as just move away from ticking boxes and move into this state where it's like, oh, wait a second, I continually can track, hey, here's the servers that have got RDP sessions. And if that session gets compromised, well, hey, there's cached domain admin credentials on it, stuff like that. Things like that, I guess, would go a long way into, well, for better or worse, making sure that customers never have to deal with you guys, right?
Yep. They don't have to.
Yeah, I get
one of the teams, we have the saying that one of the teams that you would not want to meet. If you're meeting us, for sure, it's like the worst days of your life.
Well, so on that point, actually, how do you deal with that kind of environment? Because it must feel kind of awkward, uncomfortable, certainly difficult, right? Because when folk are having a really bad day at the office, emotions are high, people get stressed, they get upset, they worry about the future of their career. All that stuff just kind of consolidates, right? On a personal level, how do you cope with situations like that?
Yeah, one of the best things about working in Dart is that we have like a humongous good culture of empathy inside of Dart because these folks have been in the field for really, really long time. They've kind of developed, let's say, being empathetic over, towards such situations. I mean, there's been like people who actually face this like day in day out every single time. I'm not going to say it's going to get easy, but rather than that, it's like, you understand them, right? You can understand that, it's going to be the worst days of their lives, just like you said. It's going to be like probably one of those folks might lose their jobs, or it could be completely something else, or that organization by itself has to be shut down for whatever reasons. I'm just giving examples like that, and it's going to be extremely hard when facing that situation, especially when it's like, yeah, really that way. And one of the things that I constantly see people doing inside of Dart is practicing empathy. They're really empathetic. They understand that, this is happening. But then when you employers, when you kind of call us in and ask us to do something, and that is what we are sort of, that is one of our objectives, right? We are there to help support you to get out of this crisis, and that's what we'll do. We'll come in and we'll make sure to, I mean, all of those turmoil, it's going to be there. These are some things that we have seen like in most of our engagements, and we hear you, we can understand your pain, but then we are here to do the job. We are here to help you out. We are here to make sure that, your security crisis is averted. We are trying to help you to recover and, come out in a decent shape. And that's what we'll do, irrespective of all the emotions that is going around. We'll make sure to do our jobs, and do it the best way possible. And that's the sort of intentions we usually take and go into such fields.
That's cool. That's cool. No, it must be. I guess number one, I got a lot of respect for people that do incident response, because it's a tough gig, right? And it can be really intense at times. To be able to apply that level of empathy when, I mean, you guys will be stressed out as well as the customer, I'm assuming, right? Because quite often the stakes are very, very high. It kind of leads me to my next thought and question. One of the things I've tended to do as I've been doing this podcast is we've been asking people, well, how did you kind of get to where you are, right? So if there's folks that are watching or listening to the podcast and they're interested in jumping into a career in incident response, I guess number one, have any advice for them? Should they even do it? And then number two, what's your kind of story? Like, how did you wind up where you're at?
Okay, I'll probably start off with my story, and then I can come up with advices on how to get here. So I started off as an intern in Symantec. It was back in a decade back, yeah, 2014, I guess. So almost a decade or more than that. And I was an intern. I started working for their MSSP, and we were providing SOC as a service, like a humble entrance. This is where, I was actually introduced to all the sysadmin stuff, all the Active Directories, and I was playing around. Being an intern, I had like a lot of places that I can explore, I can learn. It's not just the security, but rather every single building block that comes before security, everything that you can do before security, and that sort of fundamentals helped. And after that, I moved on to Microsoft as an incident responder. I was working in Microsoft for another 2 years as an incident responder. And this is where I was introduced to threat hunting. I was introduced to all of these small logs and 4688s, and all of the Microsoft logs, which was pretty interesting, and a lot of learnings there. And then I moved to other companies as well after that, like where I was also helping set up an entire SOC from the scratch, like completely zero security to like a good mature SOC. And that's another experience that I have close to my heart, because there was a lot of learning, of course. And when I heard that the Dart was hiring, I immediately applied, because I knew Dart even back when I was working in Microsoft, like a pretty cool team, and I was always envying, and I was not sure if I can get through. But at this stage, when like 2022-ish, I guess, I knew that I can like probably crack it, and I gave it a shot, and yeah, I did. And how do you get here? I think it's more of, especially for incident response, yeah, I think get your fundamentals straight. Make sure to do a lot of things that you can learn from. For example, do a little bit of sysadmin stuff. It's not going to be wrong. It's going to help you. Play around with Active Directory. Try to understand how Active Directories work, and after that, move into security. Do the basic stuff, like okay, try to understand how different attacks work. How does it really look into the logs when an artifact is created? How does that artifact really look like? Let's assume that you have like an actor, or let's assume that you have like you run a process, and then you clear out the entire 4688 logs or all of the security logs, and then you still have to prove, or you have to find if something of that sort happened, right? So what sort of artifacts can you use? This is a sort of mentality you might have to. So it's all about trying and doing things. And now, before this, it was extremely extremely a little bit hard to do things, but now you have like a lot of hack the box, a lot of different places where you can simulate such stuffs and understand. And there's so many different CTFs that give you the exact exposure that I was not probably like 5 years or 4 years or 6 years back, I did not really have an access to. But recently, I think there's been an explosion of amazing content, amazing contribution from a lot of different people. And I think it's a great time to use all of this. Use AI, I would say, if you're not able to understand something. I mean, of course, there are so many different concepts out there, which is extremely hard and which is extremely confusing, right? And use AI, simplify it, try to understand it, try to play around with it, try to figure out the nuances of all these small stuff, just so that you can understand and learn it better. And once you do all of these small, let's say, efforts, when you take all of these small efforts, I'm pretty sure you would easily end up at Dart, or even somewhere even better than a Dart. Like you always have, you would usually get to a point where you would be extremely comfortable in doing an incident response.
I mean, listen, that's a ton of advice. That's really, really cool. And what's very interesting to me, based on what you said, really two things. Number one, having that background mindset of like that kind of conventional sysadmin, right, where it's that deep troubleshooting skill. That sounds quite replicable to incident response, and as far as you're trolling through logs, you're understanding how stuff works. Then also what's interesting to me is you mentioned things like hack the box. I don't play around with those much, but it sounds to me like your perception is they're pretty good these days, right? Insofar as a way that folks can start upskilling and things like this.
Exactly. There's a lot of different places where, like, there's also CTFs out there, which kind of replicates an entire APT attack based on all the reports that's already generated. And they basically give you the image and then ask you to figure out what exactly happened here, right? And there's also a walkthrough from people who've already done it. So it's more of a learning. It's more of the learning curve and trying to do it all by yourself. And if you're not able to do it, it's all good. Try to learn from what other people have done. Learn that, so that the next level or the next image that you work on, you do not have to really look into other people's walkthrough, but rather you can do it all yourself. So it's more of the learning curve, and it's like an amazing time to be alive at this point, because there is so much of resources out there. And with AI coming up, which is helping you really learn like things like really easy, I think it's an amazing time, especially for learning.
Love it. Well, listen, on that really optimistic and positive note, I think it's time we wrap up there. I love the point that you made about AI being a really good tool for learning. It's not going to do the job for you, right? At least not yet, but it's going to make stuff a little bit easier to digest. Just the other day, I must have read a blog about 5 times, and I was like, I just don't get it. And then I took it, I punched it into a ChatGPT, and I said, just explain this to me like I'm 5 years old. And then click, I get it, right? You know what I mean? Because it broke it down to the level of understanding that I needed to be at, and it was kind of a bit too high for me, right? So stuff like that just really helps folks accelerate their learning journey way easier than before you or I probably ever got started in this industry.
Yep, exactly.
So listen, this has been fantastic. I learned tons and tons of stuff about the kind of work that you guys are doing over at Dart and in your work in incident response. And I think our listeners, key takeaways, right? Number one, throw as much security as possible, slow the attacker down and raise as much noise as possible, increase their costs. If someone has to take away one thing out of this podcast, right? So, hey, I'm listening to this podcast on my drive to work. I get to the office. I need to do one thing. What should that one thing be to make sure that they don't have to see you?
Okay, so if there's like one thing that I want you to do, make sure to collect, make sure to take all the security controls, the low hanging security controls, make sure to do all of that first, and then slowly build up on it, and you'll surely get there. And that's basically one of the things that I would always recommend all of the SOCs or people I get in touch with say, get the security, get the low hanging fruits first, and everything else will start falling into place.
Love it. Good advice. Well, listen, Shiva P, pleasure talking to you. Hope everyone's enjoyed the podcast. If folks want to connect with you online, can they do that? And if so, where's the right place to find you?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. Make sure to reach out if you have any questions. Just pop in, send me a message or send me a hi, and I'll always be there to respond.
Great. Well, listen, thanks for your time.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks a lot for this. Appreciate it, Drew.
Cheers.
Reach out to us about the Entra ID advisory service, and hopefully I'll see you soon.